Everyone for joining me. So feel free to chime in. My name is Paul Tranny, evangelist for Adobe. I'm going to talk. Kind of let me know. Just give me a little shout out. Love to hear from you. And I want to know your no nonsense tips is the goal. So yeah, feel free to chime in. And again, these are like, we talk about features and we're like, hey, here's a tip. When really it's just like a feature that, you know, we're like all too happy the developers made. And I want to talk about those no nonsense tips, the tips that just the things that I use every day that help me get up and running faster. So if that works out for you, I'm going to go ahead and switch over in a second. As soon as I hit I for eyedropper and cover up some of the tips so you don't see everything right away. So check this out. Switching over here, I'm in Illustrator. So hello, Ivan and Anthony and Sarah. Good to have you here. Steve, Melissa, Jared, you get the idea. Smooth jazz playing in the background. Therese from Sweden as well. And Belgium in the house. Cool. So let's kind of dive into this if we can. So happy that you are here. Again, you can see this first tip. This is probably the big thing that that's helped me out the most, is setting up Illustrator specific for me. So I can start working right away. Okay, and I feel like I talk about this a lot, but I can't get over how handy it is. So hopefully you like this, Andrea. Hello there, and Steve as well from New Zealand. And what I mean is, yes, there are preferences, but I'm talking about going beyond that. File, new. Let's dive into this. New document. You could see all these fun different profiles that I have. I actually have some called superpowers, one that's all you need, right? And how do you make this file? So that's what I do. Rather than sort of starting with this standard file, because I did just start with a standard file, it's fine. But check this out. Like, I don't have a lot of swatches that honestly I want. In fact, if I go in here, these are a lot of CMYK colors, and I actually work in RGB. So when I pick this color, we're like, oh no, that's like a weird CMYK red. I want this true red. So I'd actually want to modify all these to make my own starter file. So that's what I would do, is come in here, change all this content like so, right? And something like that. Start to get this looking right, especially when it comes to gradients as well. A lot of times I'll make my own gradients, and I'll do these color schemes. First off, again, I hate it. Anytime you jump in here and you're like, oh, I got to adjust all this just to get a basic gradient. I got to come in here and like, okay, now I want this. Look at how many clicks I'm doing. And I've done this multiple times because all I want is a pink to a teal gradient. And I have to add that accordingly. We get it. Work it. Right, you get the idea. So it's a lot of work just for one gradient in this case. I finally have established that gradient, and then we add it. Whew, that was a lot of work. And we haven't even started designing yet. So what I'll typically do is I will create a master file. In fact, I'll show it to you right now. I'll create this master file, and I'll show you where it goes. Here's my superpowers file. Okay, so these are no nonsense tips, Valder. Hopefully you like this. Hello, Valder. Hello. So all this crazy stuff that I do, and I'm like, I have all these, look at this. Now I have all these cool gradients that I've already made up, right? I've made these. I have all these amazing brushes as well. So I'll just hit, B for brush, and just kind of show you all these brushes in here that are already set up for me. Okay, so as you can see right over here, yeah, we get that standard one. Yeah, I get it. I want a city brush, right? I want a snake brush, right? And now you can see I can go ahead and, draw and make a Medusa, whatever the case may be, right? You can see what I'm doing right now. So once I've created all these things, all these sweet gradients, right? All these awesome brushes, even some defaults as well. Hello, Tishepo from South Africa. Good to have you here. And Felix as well. So that's what I do after I've created everything, by the way. And not only that, when I draw, I'll hit N for pencil. So I'll select the pencil tool, right? And then I'll draw. And a lot of times I might want this to be thicker or something. Like I want a new default, right? I want a thick default. Maybe I want an entirely different color, because actually, did you know the default black you paint with or draw with is going to be like a CMYK black. So it's not really a true black. But really, I want this stroke to be 10 points, because we know all the hip, cool designs these days are using these fat strokes. But instead of drawing and then having to draw again, actually, let me change that. Go into Appearance, turn this off. But I don't want it to reset every time. So what you could do is you could turn this off. Turn off New Art has basic appearance. So basically I'm making these modifications to Illustrator, turning on some preferences that I can talk about later, maybe changing my default font as well. Let's go into, did you know you could do that? Let's go into not only character, but we want character, wait for it, window, character styles. Here's like my normal character style. So I could even customize this as well. You can see I already did. I said, hey, you know what? Every time I start new text, don't have it be Myriad Pro, have it be this Acumen variable concept. So now when I type, right, let's move this out of the way. You get the idea. No nonsense. Right, with that text, you can see this is actually the character style that is being used by default. In fact, look, because I do a lot of sort of like logo designs, so I really crank up this size to 120 point, and I change the font. So I've set up my Uber file. It's looking fantastic. All I need to do, let's just save this. And maybe I could paste this into chat. I'm going to save it to this new document profiles folder. I'm going to show the enclosing folder just so you know. It's pretty deep, but since you're here with me right now, oh, I do not remember how to copy the path. But basically it goes in your, I'm so sorry. I wish I could make this easier for you, but in Library Application Support for Adobe Illustrator 23, right in here, New Document Profiles, that's where I have my superpowers and everything. So that's the idea, right? I save it there. We'll call this Super Duper Powers. Saving that. Of course, I might need to restart Illustrator, but not to worry, you get the idea. I've created this new profile. Let's close this. Let's close this file because we don't need it anymore as well. And again, we are going to set up Illustrator specific for me by going to File, New. This is going to be the test to see if I actually have to restart. I actually don't know if I need to. Going into Print, and then View All Presets. Oh, there it is. Actually, I didn't even need to restart. So now I have all those gradients and everything that I need right at the get-go. Click and create. I will say, Danny, I'll answer that in a question. And you can see, look, I could actually get started right away. Hit N for pencil, drawing out. That's what I want. We could see all my swatches. So as I start to create, oh, look at that. Finally, no fuss whatsoever, because I find myself using these same hip like gradients, as you can see right in here. Not only that, by the way, I have a ton of other things, but again, I just have to make this stuff once, and now all of a sudden, oh look, I have a cool dot pattern. I made it once, I'm ready to go. Cool, let's move on. Where did I get those cool designer pillows? Let's kind of switch over. Those might be available on, I think it's store.adobe.com. I could be wrong. There's Adobe merchandise link, and I don't know if anybody knows where, but yeah, I would love to make them as a, love to actually share that. I don't know, Raylyn, I don't know if you know, but that's a great question. So let's switch back over. Got another question that came in, a couple of them. You are fantastic. Thank you so much for whoever typed that in. Awesome. So thank you, Raylan. Copying this. Here's the link to that default presets. Again, we're talking no nonsense presets. Something like that. Boom. Let's go ahead and pin that. Oh, geez. Wrong one. Moving too fast. Pinning that comment. Oh, a comment. Okay, so let's move on. That's what I've done. That's what gets me started quickly. Let's take a look at some of the other tips that I kind of dive into. Let's actually move this down for a little reveal as well. Another thing I do is I use the properties panel. And by the way, before I even get into the properties panel, I kind of want to talk about some other little tips and tricks. You should be not only setting up Illustrator specific to you, but setting up all your shortcuts that are really specific to you. I think right now, actually, what I do a lot is I show and hide artboards a lot. So Shift Command H. Let's get out of that menu. Can't see it so much here. Let's kind of go to this other document. Rather than having this weird border, so that's what's happening. I have this weird border. That is the artboard, and I can just do Shift Command H to hide that. Okay. Another thing I can do is actually show or hide the transparency grid. You want to hear a pro tip as well? This is awesome. By the way, this is gonna kind of blow your mind a little bit, because I was thinking, you know what, I kind of like this, but since I'm working on this presentation, I want everything to be black, even this background, right? And notice, let me just kind of switch over here. Look at this. I want to show everything, so I can switch this to transparency, but what if I want that black as if I'm in Photoshop? I just want everything to be black. Well, you can do that by, this is like a pro tip as well. Hide the transparency grid. Actually, no, I want to show the transparency grid, which is what I'm doing now, showing it, going into File, Document Setup, and for this transparency grid, all you do is you change the color to black. That square to black. This square to black. And then click OK. And now you're always going to have it black infinitely, regardless of what's happening. So hopefully that works for you. If you do want a color, what's happening here is it is the, going into document setup again, it is the transparency settings that we have in here. And you can simulate colored paper. All right, fantastic. Let's move on. Let me know if you have, Chris, you are too kind. Oh, thank you so much, Adobe Illustrator. AdobeBrandedMerchandise.com. Thank you so much. That's where it is. Okay, so cool. Let's move on. Now that we've really customized Illustrator, right? We could do a couple other. Shift Command H. We hide and show the transparency grid as well. Is what I'm doing. Command 0. There it is. So you get the idea. I have this set up. I'm good to go. I can start to play with this. A lot of times I'll be drawing, by the way. So I'll kind of create something. I'll come in here, create a zoop. Let's create something kind of fun really fast. Boom. There we go. I'm creating some objects. And what I sometimes do is I'm kind of clicking around. I'm like, oh, I'm looking for the shaper tool. Where's the shaper tool? Where's the shaper? Oh, whoever has accidentally clicked on this, Jessica or Chris or Caroline, have you ever accidentally clicked on this button, the perspective grid tool, and you're like, oh man, really? Which is fantastic, but sometimes you just don't want it. So you got to go in here. You got to go into perspective grid. You got to hide grid. It's a mess. What you can do is you can come down here to edit toolbar. You can say, hey, you know what? Let's create a new toolbar. Paul's 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of these toolbars? Oh, no. I want to kind of go in here and I want to grab this tool. I want to pull it out. Pull it out. Pull it out. Pulling out all those tools that I don't need. So I just pulled out these tools. Right? I don't spray with symbols. Let's pull that out. Let's pull out all of those, right? Just so I don't accidentally click on it, but more importantly is because I just don't need it, right? So what I'm doing is I'm customizing the toolbar, and it's done by clicking right down here. So customize the toolbar, get rid of perspective grid is what I do. Yes, June, it's so annoying. Yeah, that grid tool, brother, I hear ya. Right, so we have the tools set up appropriately. We can always go back in and reset it as well. But again, I've kind of already established how I want it. And I would say it's looking pretty good. Cool. And what did I do? I just clicked it again. Hide that grid. All right, kind of let's move on. Going back into no nonsense tips, use the properties panel, right? We hopefully, or you know about this. As I come in here, I'll, again, just sort of draw a shape out. Maybe I'll change the color. I'll use the color panel to maybe pick a different color, right? Let's move this up. Whoop. Right, like I'm doing now. I want a gradient, so what you'll do is you'll open up the gradient panel and you'll like click on this gradient and start to make a gradient here. We don't need to do that. You don't need to jump around to different panels. In fact, if I just open up the properties panel and I always have this up, I'll even close everything else. This has everything I need. So if I'm creating a leaf, for instance, I want to give it a new gradient. Right here, I want to edit this gradient. I don't have to jump to the gradient panel. Everything is always a click away. As you can see, right in here, I adjust or change the gradient from my properties panel. Even if I happen to have two out, I have two graphics. I might want them to be somewhat even. Sorry about that. These three, what do? I even use my alignment panel. I don't need align because look right over here in my properties panel, it's contextual. So it gives me everything I need. If I want to align this, jumping in here, hey, we can vertically align center. I can click this panel. This essentially is like having the align panel right in front of me, but it cleans up everything, as you can say. We can align, if you don't know about this, you can align to a key object. And that means this object or this object, whichever one I click on, it has that thicker border, says, hey, align to this key object to the base of it. Align to that key object, the base, boom, there it is, right? Okay, so Kamal might have had to restart Illustrator for a reason. Yes, okay, let's... Yeah, so that's a good question. Like, you know, having the toolbar as one column as well, we can click into that. And that's a good reason for customizing it, because when I make it one column, look, I actually don't even have access to all those tools. Like, I can't even see it. They go right off my screen when I go one column. So again, that's just another reason to use the custom toolbar right in there. Okay, so let's move on. Another thing you want to do is not bend vectors. So let's move this over just to show you. We don't necessarily want to worry about, hopefully that's my next. Yeah, I'm kind of jumping down this. Don't worry about bending vectors. I think we talk about bending Bezier points, and it's totally cool. But you don't necessarily have to do that. There's so many tools in Illustrator that allow me to bend graphics. Say, for instance, if I wanted to make a leaf, right? I want to make a leaf. Maybe I'll hit... you know, use the pen tool, and I'll come in here and I'll click, and then I'll like do a click and drag, and then I'll click down here, and then I'll click over here. And that could work for my leaf, right? And then I'll start bending these vectors using the direct selection tool, which is most of our life, right? We're like trying to align these, all that fun stuff. We build in a lot of distortion and bending capabilities of vectors. For instance, if I just select on this object, maybe I select these two opposing corners and bend those in, and now we have our leaf. Okay, so Illustrator makes a lot of these things easy, even for this shape. What if I want to bend it a little more as if it's like a leaf that's kind of drooping down or something, right? I can do that a number of ways. In fact, one way I'll do it, rather than modifying the Beziers, so what I'm saying is don't worry about modifying Beziers. Use the tools in Illustrator because there's probably an easier way. Free transform tool right here. Click. Oh, thank you very much. Did I say free transform tool? I apologize. It's the puppet warp tool. CIA Design, what's up in the house? Anwar, good to see you. So check this out. Using the puppet warp tool, let's wait for it because it's not called exactly that. Never mind. Puppet warp tool. As soon as I click on it, it already identifies and adds those points where I want it to be. So it's like, yeah, I can move this around and bend this any way I want. But I actually want to put a pin in the middle, and now I can bend it and make it look more like a leaf, right? And I'm not modifying Bezier points. I'm using Illustrator to do its magic, okay? Jumping into this real fast, Maria, good to have you. Hello. King 30, Remorda the third. A good question we can talk about. Clipping masks might be a good conversation as well, maybe for another day. I'm going to select this. I'm going to show you something else as well. Again, these are no-nonsense tips. I'm going to jump into the appearance panel. So for this appearance panel, first off, notice that this is kind of wrapped in a group. So I want to show you that for the appearance panel, like I sometimes see people like sort of stack one object on top of the next because maybe this second object has another gradient, right? And they're like, oh, I want this to be a gradient. And I'm going to use the gradient tool. I'm going to do that because I want to have this linear gradient and then I want it to go like that or something like that. That's what they'll do is they'll start stacking one vector onto the next, right? And I'll just change this to say overlay for instance. When I don't want to stack objects, I actually want to use the appearance panel. So going in here, appearance panel. And what I could do in the appearance panel is add a new fill. So for any object, you can add as many fills and as many strokes as you want. So from here, I've added a new fill. I've added that gradient like I was doing before, right? I'm adjusting that gradient accordingly. Zoop. I'm adjusting the blend mode as well. Down to overlay or something, or maybe soft light. And that's what I want to do. I want to actually use the appearance panel to add new strokes, to add new fills, to get this the way I want it to look. So that's again, just another tip for you as I take a look at this. Let's make this a little darker. What do you think? Fantastic. That's cool. That's fine. I won't sweat that too much. I'm not crazy about that stroke, basically. That's why I was playing with it. Let's come in here. Appearance panel. There's my stroke. Let's just get rid of it. There we go. Let's move on. One. Shortcuts. Click and drag. A lot of times I will like reflect objects by just double clicking on the reflect tool, and you can see I'm just trying to make some nice organic leaves so I have something decent to show off today. All right. Fantastic. Let's move on. Puppet Warp tool is awesome. All these tools, a lot of these tools I should say, have additional properties. So you're also going to want to have these take a look at these modifiers for tools as well. So if I want to add a stem right in here, and let me just grab a decent color. My pencil, for instance, might seem a little rough as I draw this out. And let's crank up the size of this. Right? When I initial draw it, I'm like, oh, that's pretty rough. I can actually draw over. I should be able to. Oh, good Lord. There we go. Drawing over the item will actually kind of redraw it, but notice how it has all these points. Just to show you, if you double click on any tool, you have additional tool options. Optimize that the way you want it. I always go to smooth, and I make sure to edit selected paths after drawing, which is nice. Keep it selected once you're done drawing it as well. So clicking OK, drawing that out. Let's just draw a new one. But you can see it's much less points as I start to draw this out. Cool. Changing. There we go. Something like that. I'm going to get all fancy on you now, if you don't mind. I think this actually needs a little bit of, I don't know, for this stroke, kind of needs a gradient as well. Maybe it's a gradient that's linear like that, but we actually want to go into the because it's not selected. Bringing that up, going in here, editing the stroke gradient. So we're going to apply this gradient across the stroke, right? So I'm just clicking right there and you can see what it does. It's going to make it look a little more round. I can adjust this accordingly. Boop. You get the idea of what I'm doing there, and taking this down a little bit to a smoother transition. All right, cool. Sorry for ignoring chat. The color profile, is it a good choice? It depends on what you're doing. We'll kind of determine if you think it's a good option, right? Color profiles are right in here. Let me just adjust this. Shoop, shoop. Send this to the back. Edit color profiles, document color mode. This is honestly, I think, the thing that screws up a lot of people is just being aware of what your output is. If you're doing things for print, maybe you want to work in CMYK. Otherwise, it's RGB is usually where I would stay. Let's kind of come over here. Let's do this really fast as well. We're talking about modifying tools. I'm going to go into my star tool, for instance. If I click and drag, sure, I get a star, right? But if I use my arrow keys, right, plus, 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 I'm adding more and more points, right? Just like that. And now all of a sudden I have, of course, what is now a nice flower, as you can see. Cool. Let's change this to sort of a bright yellow. Same thing I can do in here. You ready for this? Same thing. Using my direct selection tool, I can rotate or change basically round the corners of all of those various little points for what was once a star is now a fun flower that I can spend more time on. Jose, what's up? Good to see you, man. Just doing some Illustrator magic. Hopefully today's finding you well. Adding one more fill right in here, kind of like that. You get the idea. Cool. Fantastic. Anel, yeah, we're not doing anything necessarily. Well, I can't say if we're doing something. We could be internally that I don't know everything. But nothing public concerning Unity for VR or any of that stuff. I would say Illustrator, like everything starts in Illustrator. So, everything starts in Illustrator and then ends up sort of as maybe a VR layer in, you know, in Arrow, for instance. So we have Project Arrow. We could talk about, I could literally have these flowers kind of sprout up in my living room, for instance, with Arrow as well. So yeah, I can call, sorry about that, calling out modifier keys when drawing. You're exactly right. Because when I drew this center, by the way, I didn't explain any of the modifier keys. I'll just delete this. Here's my circle. And then typically I'll click Option to draw from the center, and Shift will constrain it. So now I can get that sort of perfect circle right there. I try not to use modifiers at all during live streams. So this is what you want to do. Once you've created all your colors, by the way, just answering Andy, is I could always go into my swatches panel, and then I can just add them accordingly right here. When I click right here, I'm going to add this color as a new swatch. So this could be Paul's yellow, right? It's going to default as a global color, which means I'm going to be able to change it later, which is awesome. I'm so glad that's set up by default. Clicking OK. It's going to go ahead and add it right up here. As I roll over it, it says Paul's yellow, right? I've actually done this, obviously, for a bunch of things. You get the idea. Okay, Ivan, the big thing you want to do, you say you have Illustrator 2018. The big thing you want to do is actually make sure you have Illustrator updated. Okay, so since you have 2018, you have access to 2019 as well, if you could do that. And you change the tools right down here, okay? Sometimes you might need to, I hope it's there, but it's not only right there, it should actually be under, give me a second. Here, right here, if you go to Window, Toolbars, just turn on Advanced. Maybe you've modified something, but change it to Advanced so you have all those tools that you need or whatever, okay? This is typically my setup. I have so Control, as I turn that off, this Control bar right up at the top, and then the application frame just keeps it from floating around. So I usually turn on application frame and the control bar. Control bar is right up here. It's going to give me a lot of the same properties that I have in my properties panel. Cool. All right. Fantastic. And again, I'll talk about clipping masks later. I think that's a good point. And again, hopefully, don't judge me for my art. I think this actually could use still a little bit more love because I'm not crazy about these extreme gradients that are happening here, but you get the idea. Probably want to change those kind of like that. You get the idea. Fantastic. Flower power indeed. And again, these are sort of real world tips I use. I'll just do a recap. Properties panel. Of course, I want to be able to, excuse me. New document profile, you want to make your own. So set up Illustrator to work for you. So you have all your super duper powers. Once you get in there, start customizing Illustrator, the toolbar, and then of course, other little shortcuts. Get used to those. I didn't really get into preferences because, hey, we can talk all day about them. I kind of keep them as is. The only ones that I really modify a lot are scaling, strokes, and effects. But get used to using those shortcut keys. Properties panel is going to be your best friend because it's going to highlight everything that you need for that specific object as I'm doing right now. Okay, so use that and yeah. Bend shapes, not Bezier points. Chances are if you're having a hard time bending all these Bezier points, we might have created a shortcut for you. You know, whether it's Puppet Warp or other warping tools. Fantastic. That's it for me. That's all I got. I'm sweating. I'm just burning up. I don't know why. All these lights. I have a nice look like a little glazed donut. But thank you so much for joining me. Let me know if you have any questions. Francis is an anniversary follower. Fantastic. I don't know what that means. It's like a new thing. Alu is as well. Very cool. Jabin. Cool. And then as far as adding custom gradients, the key thing for new users, and let me just switch right over here, one thing I didn't talk about, is just being aware of what's selected. Sometimes you'll have the stroke in front, sometimes you'll have the fill in front. But once this fill is in front, you can then go to your swatches panel and click right here and add that fill, which happens to be a gradient, right in there. One thing gradients aren't is gradients are not aren't global swatches, right? So these are global. They have that little notch cut out of them. That means they're a global swatch. I could change it at any time later. These are not, just so you know. But they are saved for me for later use and are just modified on an individual basis. All right, fantastic. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and make something cool. My goal is to impress you with graphics somehow. I hope you appreciate it. But here, everybody gets a flower, I guess, at least. Thank you, Muriel, and everyone, and everybody who's our anniversary follower as well. Hang out for more later on, and thank you so much for joining me. Have a beautiful day. Remember, drink lots of water, and go to bed early for once. Just Just kidding. Stay up as late as you want, as long as you're making cool stuff.